I can't say no. So
grandmas are not allowed to say no.
when she was younger and she was living with us, I said no a few times.
Okay.
But at that point, I was more mom than grandma.
Depends what role you're filling.
Yep.
All right, we are live on YouTube, just so you guys know.
Good, my Christmas tree didn't make it on YouTube.
We're official.
Hi, Ann.
Hi, Ann.
We've got a quorum. Ann's here.
Oh yeah. Gotta find.
I finally learned how to adjust my monitor. So before it was up high and I look so far away and we keep going in and out. Then my son was over and he says, Dad, you can adjust this at whatever level you want. And I thought,
Nice.
Oh, wow, that's nice.
That is nice.
Mm-hmm.
I hope my Zooming goes okay Sunday with Tualatin because my internet is all messed up here. I told Ann about it. And so now Comcast Infinity is coming out on Monday and they're going to switch me over because I have less than a 1 megabyte upload.
Yeah, that's not good.
And with Comcast Infinity, I get a 15 megabyte upload.
Yeah.
And so when I try to stream to watch Sunday morning lesson or whatever, it goes in and out. It disconnects, then connects again. And so I'm looking forward.
I'll tell you,
to
Dave,
having
I'll tell you, since I have Xfinity here at my house and have their internet, it'll do great. Both Debbie and I, as teachers, we're both conducting simultaneous Zoom, Google Meets virtual video lessons, and
nice.
It just never a hitch.
Yeah, I've had nothing but problems with this CenturyLink, and I'm just glad to get rid of them now. Mm-hmm. But even on their cell phone plans with Verizon, I was paying $120 or $119. My wife will correct me. $119 a month for 2 phones for 3 gigabytes of data, and we share that. Then I went over to Xfinity. Now it's $30 a month for both phones in the same amount of data. And I'm like, you're kidding me. He said, I just saved you $1,000 a year right there alone.
Yeah. And if you want unlimited, it's only $45 a phone. So it'd only be $90 a month for unlimited data.
Yeah. Well, we don't use that much. So
neither
the 3, in fact, for 30 days, I've used, 0.27 of 1 gigabyte.
See, that's
all I've used.
Debbie and I, we do by the gigabyte. We pay $12 per gig. So if we don't use that much, we end up paying just $24 in a month.
Nice. Yeah, it'll be nice to be able to stream things and not get disconnected.
I'm wondering who Galaxy Tab A7 is.
Somebody's got a Galaxy tablet.
I know.
All right. FS up. Who's Galaxy Tab?
I know. And then there's Linda Schaefer. How's it going, Linda?
Schaefer's logged in.
I'm not quite there yet.
She is calm and pretty as a mountain lake. Look at that.
I can hear Paul and Linda both.
Yeah.
Good to see you, Sam.
We're eavesdropping on your guys' conversation.
How we fumble through to get to Zoom.
Yeah.
I think I'm there. I don't know if I'm there. I'm almost there.
All right.
Hey, Paul. Paul, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hey, I just wanted to tell you how much I appreciated that heartfelt prayer that you said on Sunday. It was amazing, and I just wanted to thank you for that awesome prayer.
It was awesome.
Yeah,
it was a great prayer.
Yep.
It was.
What?
It was a great prayer.
It was from the heart. From the heart.
Yet
It showed.
I could tell.
It showed.
Yep. Sam and Sandy Scott say hi. They're watching on YouTube. Hi.
Hi, Sam and Sandy.
Hi, Sam.
Hi, Sam and Sandy.
And Brian and
Hey,
Kelly
dog.
are on YouTube tonight, they said. They say hi.
We should wave to them too. Everybody wave.
Think we're there.
Boy, we
Mystery
got a lot of people that are
Galaxy
waiting until
tab
the
is-
last minute tonight. Surprised. It's 5 till.
Can't see the,
How's Esther
Name of-
doing today?
she's doing great. Hey, honey. Yeah, she's doing something, but yeah, she'll be here.
Good. Getting stronger, right?
Oh,
Pretty-
yeah. Oh, yeah.
Pretty interesting news article I saw. This is a World War II
Here
veteran.
she is.
His
All
name is
right.
Louis Zamperini. He was shot down in the Pacific, spent over a month, just 47 days floating in the water till he's made a prisoner by Japan and all that.
Yep.
He had all these troubles with PTSD,
That's the wrong way.
nightmares, turned to alcoholism, all this. The only thing that saved him in his later life from all his troubles because of all his stress was
You got
he
it.
eventually came to God.
Wow.
Yeah, it's if you ever read the book Unbroken, that book's all about his life. And he actually met Hitler at the Olympics in Berlin because he was an Olympic runner. And the next Olympics was supposed to be his time to shine. And then, of course, World War II broke out. But he actually met Hitler, and Hitler said something to him after he did really well in one of the races. And then in the years following, World War II started, and he was on one of those airplanes where there's 5 or 6 guys crammed in there dropping bombs, and that's I would recommend everybody read the book Unbroken because it's a crazy story what that guy went
Good
through.
movie too.
Yeah.
The thing that got him was a quote that no man can solve the problems of life without Jesus. And that's what
Yeah. Yep.
it's the Barretts.
Yes.
Hello.
Hello.
Everybody enjoy the sunshine today?
Yeah, it was nice.
Yeah.
There, Christmas lights are up now.
Everybody but me.
Sunshine, I've been inside looking at monitors all day long.
Yes,
Oh, that's no good.
I got to enjoy a little bit of it, Brad, because I was done at 3:30.
Yay.
Now, 3:00, I had my afternoon study group with the English language learners who need the extra help.
Are the days still getting darker?
Yes.
Till December
Yes.
21st.
Yeah.
Mhm.
All right.
Then I'll start turning around.
Bummer.
Amen.
Just seems like it's getting dark so early
It is.
already.
Seems to do that once a
But
year
the
about
man
this
who
time.
grew up in Washington where it gets darker even sooner.
Yeah, you never really get used to it, it seems like.
I agree. I look forward to the days going back the other way.
Yeah.
Mhm.
All right. Give people a few more minutes. Everybody's waiting until the last minute, the last possible second to sign on tonight. It's okay.
I've done that.
Well, I guess we're not everybody, those who are here.
No, obviously not.
Yeah, yes. That's exactly what I meant.
Just, be Horton who hears a who, say what you mean.
Put it on there
100%.
tonight.
You guys are funny.
Stop it.
Dave's laughing.
Well, yeah, because Esther, she's saying some things that are funny.
Okay.
She's
Okay.
making me laugh so hard.
Normally, you're the comedian in the relationship.
No, things have changed since COVID.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, she's changed quite a bit.
She like a whole new Esther.
Yeah, she laughs more now than I've ever seen her laugh.
That's good. Laughing is good.
What's the old Reader's Digest thing? Laughter's the best medicine.
Yeah.
Healing to the bones.
Okay. All right. Brad, do you mind saying a prayer for us here in 1 minute? Is that cool? All right. Sounds good. We'll do that in just a minute. Hope everyone had a good day. And yeah, like Jack said, hope you got to enjoy some sun. That was kind of nice. Nice break from the rain. I had my water shut off yesterday. That was kind of interesting. Like the whole front part of our apartment building was flooded. I think there's a busted water main or something. And so that was kind of interesting, but it got all fixed. But so anyways, it was nice to have sun today to kind of dry everything out around my apartment.
Definitely.
All right, Brad, why don't you go ahead and lead us in an opening prayer and we'll go ahead and get started.
Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this time. We can come together even in this fashion, that we can look at your word and learn lessons from it. We ask you to be with those who are ailing, who are ill, who have need of comfort in your care and your loving kindness that only you can provide, that you would be with them and guide them and show them that loving kindness. Please be with us this night. Grant us the rest when we lay our heads down this night, that we may get up the next morning to serve you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. See, there's probably three people or so that joined while you were praying there, Brad. Anyways, that's funny.
Well, what can I say? I'm a draw.
I know. As soon as you start talking, the people start coming. That's good. All right. Well, anyways, welcome everybody. If you're just joining us, if you could help me out, maybe just mute your mic and your camera. But obviously, as I said last week, if you guys have any comments or anything, I'll try and keep an eye on it. It's kind of funny. I was joking with somebody, like I got more texts during class last week than I've ever gotten doing these online classes. For some reason, people were texting me a bunch, and that's totally cool. So if you guys on YouTube have comments and you want to text me, I got my phone next to me. And I say that also so that people don't think I'm being rude and secretly texting while I'm teaching class, being distracted. Although that is kind of what I'm doing, except it's Bible related. It's related to this class. So anyways, feel free to do that. There's also the raise your hand function on Zoom. That kind of helps me see if somebody has comments as well. But we're picking up and we're talking about the book of Judges, and I love that slide just because it captures the theme in their own eyes. And I know we've already kind of talked about that, and we'll see that more as we wrap the book up. But as far as we'll see that phrase used, but we really just see that from beginning to end in this book, that Israel becomes a people that is not consistent when it comes to their obedience towards God. And we see that they more and more become a people that just does what's right in their own eyes. And really in the end is somewhat rebellious against God. And so we talked about a lot of important things last week. So if you weren't here, we'll just do a little bit of a review. But last week, I think maybe the main thing that we covered was this idea that God tests, he tests his people. And I have a picture there of Abraham offering his son Isaac, just to kind of remind us that this is something that God has done. This is something that he does with his people often. He allows us to sometimes go through hard things, and that is hard for us to reconcile, how we can have a loving God who also allows us to go through hard things. But what we find in Judges is that it's not pointless. The trials, the tests are not pointless. And we even see that with Abraham, that there was a point to what God was asking Abraham to do. And it was simply to see how faithful Abraham was and if he will simply listen and trust God no matter what. And the reason that's so important is that ends up being good for us in the end. If we can keep learning that if I trust in God, God will take care of me, even when things seem just hard to see, as I'm sure it was hard to see how things were going to work out for Abraham when he was offering his son Isaac. But the more we trust in God and the more we see it just works out, even when I don't know how it's going to, that just creates even more endurance and more godly character. And really it bolsters our faith in God the more tests we go through. And so when you look at Judges and you look at the text, the first 2 chapters really serve as an introduction in many ways to the whole book, and almost kind of gives us an outline or a prologue to what really takes place throughout the entire book. And we even talked about in the first class that cycle of sin, where you have God's people, Israel, and then they go astray, and then they cry out to God, they repent, and then God raises up a judge to deliver them. And then the whole cycle repeats itself all over again. But what we read last week is that God left some of these Canaanites to dwell among the Israelites still. And when I say God left them, we really should start off by saying the Israelites left them. And God didn't go out of his way to drive them out. He wasn't going to do it for the Israelites. I mean, I suppose God could have if he really wanted to. He could have brought some natural disaster. He could have struck them all dead in an instant if that's what he wanted to do to the Canaanites. But it says that he left several of these peoples behind in Israel, and they were left there because Israel didn't drive them out like they were supposed to. And we're told the reason why God does that in Judges chapter 2 and verse 22. It says that God did that in order to test Israel by them. That is, by these nations that God would leave behind. And it was to see whether they will take care to walk in the way of the Lord as their fathers did. And so he left them behind to really teach them, well, for a couple of reasons, I guess. It was in order to test them, but it was also in order to see if they would walk in the way of the Lord. I suppose that really is what the test was. Are they just going to throw their hands up and give themselves over totally to these Canaanite tribes? Or are they going to be careful to walk in the way of the Lord? And we talked about how important that theme is throughout the Bible, walking in the way of the Lord. And we think about several Bible characters that, it's said they walked with God. I think it says it about Noah. Remember, it says that also about Enoch. But it's just this really important theme that we see throughout the whole Bible, that what God desires is for us to walk in his way. And I see Rochelle is joining us now. But he wants us to walk in the way of the Lord. And again, that's because that's going to ultimately end up being in our best interest. Hold on a second. Here's somebody. All right. And so it's interesting. We start in Judges chapter 3. We're going to be looking at 3 different judges, and they're all found in this chapter. But when you go to Judges chapter 3 and verse 7, it's after all these nations are listed as being left in Israel. All these Canaanite peoples are kind of enumerated in the beginning of Judges chapter 3 as those that God allowed to continue to dwell in that land. And it says, and the people of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. They forgot the Lord their God and served the Baals and the Asheroth. And so it takes almost no time at all for these wicked nations to start influencing Israel. And there's a couple things that I want us to notice when we look at Judges chapter 3 and verse 7. And this is just before we're introduced to Othniel. And that's that it says they forgot the Lord their God. Maybe I'll ask this. What is meant when it says they forgot the Lord? I have a hard time believing that it means that, well, we use the word forget, I think, different than what is intended here. like I forgot my keys or something like that, or I forgot what the answer was on the test. We use that word as to describe when something just kind of totally leaves our mind. But is that what is being really talked about here? Did the Israelites totally forget who God is? Is that what the author is intending to say? And so I guess I'm asking what's meant here. Go ahead, David.
Well, I don't think that's the case. When it says they forgot the Lord their God, it's because of the persuasion they had with those who were around them. They started, it says, and served the Baals and the Asheroth. And so it's not that they totally forgot God. They just made a choice. And their choice was to serve the Baals and the Asheroth rather than God.
Yeah, that's really well said. So go ahead. It sounds like, was that Brad's about to say something? Go ahead.
Using the digital lookup here of the actual words, the word forgot there carries with it the meaning of neglect. Mm-hmm. It's not they completely forgot. It's just, they didn't want to take time for it. It sort of became that item on the shelf in your house that just sort of sits there and gathers dust, and it just was neglected and forgotten that way.
And kind of maybe that task at home, I'll get to it, but we never do. But yeah, and so I'm glad that you appeal to the Hebrew. I have the Hebrew here as well. So the word forgot is this Hebrew word sakah, and this is Lexham Theological Word Book. It's a dictionary I use frequently, but it defines it as the act of removing one's knowledge from the forefront of one's mind, whether intentionally or unintentionally. And I think that's a really interesting way to describe this word, because it says it's something that can be done unintentionally, which we see that all the time. That's the one that, they forgot their keys, right? But then it can be done intentionally as well. And I think that that's kind of what you see in Israel. They neglected God. They weren't careful to keep his word. And they actually, what they ended up doing is they ended up replacing God with other gods. That was a conscious choice. And they ended up taking wives from these other tribes and adopting their gods rather than, following the one true God. The opposite word for forgot is to remember. I mean, obviously in the English language, and that Hebrew word is zakar, which, remember, it involves acting upon knowledge. And so that's remember, to act upon knowledge. It's really how that word is often used in the Old Testament. But then sakah is the opposite of that. It's to not act upon knowledge. So their problem wasn't that they didn't know God in the sense of not knowing his commandments, or even not knowing what God had done for generations in the past. They likely knew the stories of Moses and even of Abraham or of Joshua, who is more recent. It's just they didn't do anything with that knowledge. And that's the last place we want to find ourselves as Christians. Is we don't want to just have words on a page when we look at our Bible. We want to take this knowledge and we want to act on it. And I know for me, it's one thing to know what the scriptures say, but am I remembering those scriptures? Am I succeeding in acting upon what I know when I'm faced with various challenges in my life? Brian Sipe says, over time, they also didn't teach their children. Yeah, I mean, that would be evident as you had this great generation of Israelites, but then the next generation didn't know God. There's obviously a breakdown in the passing of the torch, so to speak, in one way or the other. But one thing, again, that I want to emphasize is that when we abandon God, it's not that we abandon him for nothing. We're always replacing God when we abandon him. It's like Jesus says, everyone has a master, and for the world, sin is our master. That's no different with the Israelites. They abandoned God, and it's not that they abandoned him for nothing. They abandoned him and replace him with these false gods, the Baals and the Asheroth. And the reason they did that is because there's probably some, really, quote unquote, appealing things for them. It was maybe a more exciting religion to them, as it implied all these, illicit sex cult practices and things like that. And they were just totally caught up in it and led astray. Brad, I see you raised your hand. You still got a comment?
Yeah, it's what you're saying there, and what's the phrase? Oh, it just went from my head. It's if you don't use it, it's the common phrase we say, if you don't use it, you lose it. If you don't practice it, if you don't continue to work something, you'll forget about it. I see that with the math I teach. When there's a break, the kids stop doing the mathematical thinking, and I have to take time to bring those minds back from that, which is really hard sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And just what you said, and the Old Testament law, it was a perfect law. It was a good law. It was hard to follow.
Mm-hmm.
It was hard to keep correctly.
Yep.
And it was a chore.
Mm-hmm.
And these others were probably nowhere near that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, true. And that's where we're thankful for what Jesus did, and that he frees us from that law, because he did what none of them are able to do. But yeah, you're right. There was things about these other idolatrous religions that weren't hard to do. In fact, in many ways, they appeal to what the flesh already wants. And so why not just do something I already want to do, as opposed to doing something that's difficult and remaining, pure, as God's law empowered them to be. It empowered them to be pure and to be free from sin, but it was hard to keep. And of course, for us, we got Jesus and the gospel, which frees us from that. And so, yeah, I think, Dave, back to what you said, as far as what does it mean when it says they forgot the Lord their God, I think that you're right. It's not that that the memory of him was lost in their brains. It's that they neglected him, as Brad was saying, and they just abandoned him, and they didn't use it, and so they lost it. And so I appreciate that. One verse that I thought was interesting for this: when the Israelites go astray, and likewise when we go astray and we're no longer being a living sacrifice for God, we need to understand that we are being a living sacrifice for something else. And I was thinking about 1 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse 20, and it's talking about paganism. And it's interesting what Paul says about paganism, and we get insight into what it really is in the eyes of God. It says in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 20, he says, I imply that what pagans sacrifice, they offer to demons and not to God. I do not want you to be participants with demons. Now, I imagine that the people who go astray, they don't realize that that's what's going on. But we have to be spiritually aware of the gravity of our sin, as the Israelites should have been aware of the gravity of their sin, that when we go astray, when we leave God, whatever sacrifices we're offering, they're being offered to demons. We're worshiping the prince of the power of the air, so to speak, whether we realize that or not. And so I just wanted to make note of that. I got another text here from Bob Miller. He says they shifted their focus just as men today struggle with shifting focus from God to worldly things. Yeah, totally. We do. That's very true. When we lose focus of God, it's oftentimes because we're focusing on something we shouldn't be focusing, and we miss the target. We get distracted. So that's kind of a little bit of an introduction of what we talked about last week. I did want to just launch in and start talking about Othniel. And I have this map up for you guys. It's a picture of, basically you got Israel, the Mediterranean Sea there, but also Mesopotamia. And I want us to see, because this is where Kushan Rishathaim, I'll say that 10 times fast. This is the king of Mesopotamia, who comes, and he's really the first oppressor that we read about in the book of Judges. Who comes and he takes the people of Israel captive. And the reason why I have this map up is so you can see how far away Mesopotamia was from Israel. I mean, if it's to scale, like how you have that scale on your screen, that's, 0 to 300 miles. If that's correct, Mesopotamia is what, 500 miles away, something like that. This is a country that is very far away from Israel. And the reason that that's important to see is because a lot of what we read in Judges is these people that are already dwelling in the land of Canaan that basically overtake them, or they're dwelling real close by to the land of Canaan or Israel, and they just cross over the river and they overtake them. That was Moab, which we'll read about next. But this is the king of Mesopotamia, and that name Rishathaim, that means, if you translate that, it means double wickedness. And so this king of Mesopotamia was evidently known for being a pretty bad guy. And he obviously was at this point, perhaps an empire, a real force to be reckoned with when we're talking about other nations that existed at that time, because he's in Mesopotamia and he's coming from, 500 miles away to enslave this Israelite nation. And so this is a real problem, and this is likely somebody that was a threat to a lot of nations during that time, as you see him, make that journey from Mesopotamia to Israel. And so that's who Israel falls prey to as they, commit these sins and they turn themselves over to idolatry. And then that brings us to Othniel. So last week, I think I mentioned it, but does anybody remember what the name Othniel means? Does anybody remember that? I hear somebody. Anybody want to answer? What does the name Othniel mean?
Lion of God.
Yeah, exactly. Lion of God. Firefighter Mark is getting ready to join us here. Welcome, Mark. Good to have you here. But yeah, Linda, you're right. It means Lion of God. And, I just find that interesting. That's actually kind of an image that's used to refer to the tribe of Judah and to Judah himself. I think that's used when Jacob is, imparting the various promises to each of his sons. But it's also used to describe Jesus, who's the Lion of Judah, right? And he's the conqueror. He conquers sin. And what's interesting about that is that Othniel is also from the tribe of Judah. And maybe I'm grasping for straws sometimes on some of these things, but I just can't help, when I read the Old Testament, it's hard not to think of Jesus when you see things like this pop up. And so when you got somebody that's name means Lion of God, and he's from the tribe of Judah, he's a deliverer, man, it just causes you to think about Jesus. And I think it's true of the whole Old Testament. It all somehow, some way, for the most part, it all points and leads us to Jesus eventually. That's what the whole Old Testament is about. And perhaps some of these judges and, really the whole book of Judges is in one way, shape, or form pointing us to Jesus, the Messiah, who's going to be the ultimate deliverer and the ultimate Savior. He's also a relative of Caleb. I'm sure we remember who Caleb is. Can anybody tell me who Caleb is? He's a pretty famous Bible character. Who's Caleb?
He was one who went and said, we can take the land. He was one of the faithful ones, one of the two faithful ones.
Yeah, that's right. So it was him and Joshua that were standing up to the other spies of Israel saying, hey, we can go into this land and we can conquer it. So you had Joshua and Caleb, and those two guys were just great examples of faith and courage when we read about them in their first attempt to go in and conquer the land of Canaan. And so Othniel is related to Caleb. I just find that interesting. And we read about Othniel for the first time in Judges chapter 1, actually, as opposed to Judges chapter 3. He's introduced in Judges chapter 1. He's kind of mentioned. Maybe we'll just actually have that on the screen. I can read that real quick. But as has already been talked about, when Israel went in, it was kind of a process as they were conquering some of these nations. And there were some nations or some peoples or tribes, however you want to put that that maybe they neglected, but eventually they got to them and they conquered them. And so this is where we're introduced to Othniel, and we read about Caleb in Judges chapter 1, verses 12 through 13. Caleb said, "He who attacks Kerioth Sepher and captures it, I will give him," this is a hard name to pronounce, but Aksah, something like that, "my daughter for a wife." And Othniel, the son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother, captured it, and he gave him Aksah, his daughter, for a wife. So here is Caleb, and there's this land that's being occupied by Canaanites, and he needs somebody. Perhaps Caleb is older, maybe not as much of a warrior as he once was, but he needs somebody to go in and capture it and take it over. And all of a sudden, this guy Othniel comes along, and he says, "I'll do it." And he goes in, he captures it, and Caleb, gives him his daughter as a wife. So immediately, what is it that we learn about Othniel just from this text? What are some things we learn about him?
He's a warrior.
Yeah, he's a warrior. What else? So it's interesting because one of the reasons that we are also given in Judges as to why God left the Canaanites in that land, it was to teach them about war. And I think kind of what we take away from that is that the Israelites became a people who became complacent and were just enjoying all these blessings, and they didn't realize how valuable they were. And they had to be taught that, hey, you got to fight for these things. Does Othniel strike you as someone that needed to be taught about war? I would say probably not. He seems like somebody that's already a warrior, as Rochelle said, right? He's also clearly somebody that's willing to step up and lead. He's willing to address a need. He's obviously somebody that is courageous. But the other thing, when you read between the lines here, is Othniel would have had to have been someone that could rally the troops, unless he went in and did this by himself, which I suppose that's possible. But you figure that he probably gathered a group of people and they went in and captured this land. So he's someone that can motivate. He's someone that can lead, but he's also someone who knows how to fight and is willing to step up and do what needs to be done. And so we're introduced to Othniel all the way in Judges chapter 1, in that first introductory chapter. And I just think that's kind of interesting, that he's introduced, and we learn a little bit about him even in the first chapter. And so that brings us then to Judges chapter 3. And this is where he's reintroduced to us. And we learn about this Mesopotamian king who's oppressing the people. And it says, "But when the people of Israel cried out to the Lord," which, by the way, I just want to mention, when you see Lord in all caps like that's the name of the Lord. That's Yahweh. That's his covenant name. So whenever you see Lord in all caps, that's you could also say Yahweh. That's what it would be in the original Hebrew language. It's a really important name. It was a sacred name that was used for God. But it says, when the people cried out to the Lord raised up a deliverer for the people of Israel, who saved them, Othniel, the son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother. And the spirit of the Lord was upon him, and he judged Israel. He went out to war, and the Lord gave Cushan-Rishathaim, king of Mesopotamia, into his hand. And his hand prevailed over Cushan-Rishathaim. Again, say that 10 times fast. But some of these judges, they are given a larger treatment than others. And so Othniel, we don't really know a whole lot about him, except that what we find is he's the first judge. But I also think that when we read about what is said about him and how God raised him up, we learn a few things about what a judge is. So what are some things that we learn about just judges in general? I'm talking about the role of a judge when we read this text. What does this text tell us?
They're a deliverer.
Yeah, they're a deliverer. What else?
They saved
Well, I
him.
find, oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, David.
No, I find it interesting because Caleb, when he asked who would take this, go to war here, and this Othniel, he steps up. Now, when you look at Caleb and Joshua, when they were the only two spies that came out and said, the Lord is with us, and the other spies we're like grasshoppers in their sight. They're giants and we don't have a chance, but not with Caleb's faith and not with Joshua. It appears that Othniel has that same kind of demeanor about himself, that he relies upon God. And it said that the Lord raised up a deliverer, and that was Othniel. So he's raised up for this moment because he holds that faith in God, understanding that God will be with him in whatever he does. And that's the confidence that a good leader, a judge has. A judge does the same thing. He makes judgments based on righteousness and justice and the law of God. And that's what these judges did that were in those roles.
Well, yeah, well said.
They didn't rely upon themselves, is what I'm saying. It was God who they relied upon.
Right. And I think what we mentioned last week as well as what we are going to see is that these judges aren't perfect. And we don't really see that with Othniel, but I think that becomes more and more obvious as we kind of see this downward spiral of morality in the book of Judges. We see the judges themselves sometimes kind of mimic that as well. But these are people God uses, and certainly Othniel seems to be a standout as far as his character goes. So thanks, appreciate that. Ann, I think you're about to say something, Ann Hoover. Not anymore. All right, never mind. So yeah, I guess the three things that I want us to see as far as what we learn about judges is that, number one, the Lord raises them up. It's God that puts these men in a position to succeed. And it's God who is using these men. And we'll find that sometimes these men, as I said, they're kind of crude instruments of God, but God uses them to achieve his will. And God uses them as a deliverer. So that word deliverer could also be translated savior. It's used in reference to God. These are people God raises up to save the Israelites when the people cry out to the Lord. And that's what's going on here as well. And then finally, it says the Spirit of the Lord was upon him. And so let's make no mistakes. Yes, Othniel was likely a good man. And I think that is a large reason why God raises him up and uses him in this instance. But it's God who's the ultimate deliverer. And what makes these men special and successful in the end is that it's the Spirit of the Lord who is upon them. It's the Spirit that is guiding them and helping them in achieving things that work out for Israel's good, and what ends up being our good as well, as Jesus comes from Israel. That word deliver, the Hebrew word is Mashiach, which is really close to the word Messiah. I just think that's kind of interesting. But as I said before, it means savior. But Dave, I agree with you. I think Othniel, he shows us that when the time comes and God needs a leader among his people, the people that are most successful are those who already have a habit of leading. And it's those men that God will raise up and put in a position where they can serve God. I guess you could use, any example of leadership positions, but you don't put somebody in a leadership position and then all of a sudden they become a leader. No, what you want is someone who is already a leader, and you put that guy in the leadership position, and it's that guy who's going to be successful. It's hard to learn to lead as you go when you're in the middle of it. But if you already know what you're doing, you're going to be obviously much more successful. And so,
yeah, Sam,
go ahead, David.
Yeah, what that reminds me of is when I was in the military and going up through the ranks, before you could get promoted to that next rank, whether it was from corporal to sergeant or sergeant to staff sergeant,
Yeah.
in the Marine Corps, you had to prove that you were already capable of those qualities in order to become that next rank. So you had to demonstrate that in all that you did, and your leaders were aware of that. He's already doing the job of a sergeant. He's eligible for promotion, and then next thing you know, promotions come up and you're selected.
Yep.
Because you've demonstrated that you're ready for that position. But you don't put somebody into that position unless they can demonstrate their ability to do the job.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. Well said. Yeah. And, you know, the people that are ready for it, those people are recognized and they're put in those positions, aren't they? And so go ahead, Brad.
I was going to say what Dave said just remind me in 1 Timothy 3, where it talks about the elders and then deacons. One of the things about establishing a deacon is let them be tested first. You know, you don't put someone who's untested into that role.
Right.
Yeah. There has to be some testing or proof of their ability to serve.
Yeah. Sorry, I just got a text. Somebody said that's why it said some people make good helpers and few make good leaders. Yeah, very true. Sorry, I got another text that's from somebody at church, but totally unrelated. But anyways, yeah, I appreciate that comment, Brad. So that's Othniel. It's kind of a quick treatment of Othniel. And then we kind of segue really quickly to Ehud. And as I said before, some guys get longer treatments than others. So we're going to see Ehud, and then we'll see Shamgar, who gets just one verse. But Ehud and his story is it's really interesting. And the foe that he's up against is this guy named Eglon. And I have a map there kind of what takes place as far as when Ehud confronts Eglon. But let's just go ahead and read Judges chapter 3 and verse 12. It says, the people of Israel again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord strengthened Eglon, the king of Moab, against Israel, because they had done what was evil in the sight of the Lord. So I have a few questions here. One thing I want us to notice real quick is where this plain of Moab is. So maybe you can see my computer mouse. But you got the Dead Sea here, right? And so we can imagine the rest of the map of Israel as you got the Jordan River going up to the Sea of Galilee. But right here is the plain of Moab, and that's kind of where Moab's territory would start, and it would go off to the east. So this is a neighboring, nation, we could call it. But who can tell me where the Moabites came from? Where did the Moabites come from?
Lot and one of his daughters.
Yeah, Lot and one of his daughters. So this group of people are actually related to the Israelites, right? Because you had Abraham and you had Lot, and so they're related. Just kind of interesting there. But the other, yeah, go ahead, Brad.
Just as a complete side note, also interesting is this time of Israelite history when that's covered by the book of Ruth.
Oh yes, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because you got Judges and then you got Ruth, and yeah, it's the same point in history. Yep. But the question I want to ask here is, I have it highlighted in yellow. The Lord strengthened Eglon. You know, this Eglon, he's going to be an enemy, and he's going to be an oppressor of Israel. And so what I think is interesting is it said the Lord strengthened him. Why on earth would the Lord strengthen an enemy of his people and someone who no doubt was an idolater himself? Why would he do that?
Well, it's obvious, and what it says is because Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. And because they were not following him according to what he has told them to do, that the Lord strengthened Eglon in order to, again, test them and to put them back where they need to be, to depend upon him rather than themselves. Whatever they had done, whatever evil was in the camp had to be removed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so God, he does this sometimes to wake his people up, doesn't he? And so I appreciate someone share with me. Well, Jack, we kind of write these together sometimes, but he brought up a good point in Amos in chapter 4, and you read in verses 6 through 12. I won't read it all, but it talks about how God sent upon his people famine. And he says, you didn't turn back to me. And he sent drought. You didn't turn back to me. Pestilence. You didn't turn back to me. I sent against you the sword of your enemies. You didn't turn back to me. And every single time that he says those things, that's the point. The point was that if he did these things, it was that they would realize, wow, we need to repent and turn back to God. But their hearts just became harder and harder every step of the way. But that's what's going on here with Israel already, is God is strengthening their enemies to judge them, but it's not just to come down on them and to be mean to them. It's the hope is that they'll repent and they'll turn back to God before it's too late. Because what Amos ends up saying in verse 12 he says, I will do this to you. Prepare to meet your God, O Israel. And he says that in Amos, not in a fun, exciting sense. It's in a sense of judgment. And so God is working with these people in this way, trying to get them to repent, trying to get them to see the error of their way. And if they just have a hard heart, that's on us. There's nothing God can do at that point without overriding our free will, right? And so Eglon is strengthened by God, which is really interesting. But we go on and we read about Eglon. And this verse always cracks me up. But in Judges 3 and verse 17, it says Ehud presented the tribute to Eglon, king of Moab. It says, now Eglon was a very fat man, which we kind of laugh at that. And in a moment, though, we'll see what's kind of going on here. But Eglon and these Moabites, they took over Jericho, which is referred to here as the city of palms. And it would have been probably a nice place to dwell. It would have been an oasis. And so what we learn about Eglon, who represents the rest of the Moabites, is that he's someone that obviously he likes luxury. He's obviously someone that's probably somewhat lazy. And, he likes to lay back and take it easy. But there's kind of a not pretty picture being painted here on purpose when it comes to the king of Moab. And so maybe we can just keep reading in our Bibles. That's verse 17. We'll keep reading, and I'll pick up in verse 17. And so we are introduced to Ehud, and we're told earlier in verse 15 that he's a left-handed man, which will come in handy later. But he takes this sword, and it's a double-edged sword, and he puts it on his right leg. And that's why it's important that it mentions that he's left-handed, because it's on his right leg where people typically wouldn't look, and he hides it under his clothes, and it's going to be real easy for him to grab his blade when he's alone with Eglon. But it says he presented the tribute to Eglon, king of Moab. And so Ehud's job, for one reason or another, he was the one that would bring tribute to this king. So that's the position Israel's in at this point. They're servants of this Moabite king, and they're bringing him money or goods or whatever it is that they're bringing to him. They're bringing tribute to him, and Ehud's the one that does it. And it says, now Eglon was a very fat man, and when Ehud had finished presenting the tribute, he sent away the people who carried the tribute. But he himself turned back at the idols near Gilgal and said, I have a secret message for you, O king. And he commanded silence, and all his attendants went from his presence. And Ehud came to him as he was sitting alone in his cool roof chamber. And Ehud said, I have a message from God for you. And he arose from his seat, and Ehud reached with his left hand, took the sword from his right thigh, and thrust it into his belly. And the hilt also went in after the blade, and the fat closed over the blade, for he did not pull the sword out of his belly, and the dung came out. And then Ehud went out into the porch and closed the doors of the roof chamber behind him and locked them. And so, remember last week we were talking about words we could use to describe the book of Judges, And, we use several words, but the last one I used was shocking. That is, the word that resonates with me most when reading the book of Judges. It's a shocking book when you see what's going on here. This is an ugly time in history. And this story of Ehud is similarly, it's shocking as we read it. And so basically what happens is, to sum up what takes place here, is Ehud, he brings tribute. I have on your map the route he takes. He goes back to Gilgal, which is close to the Jordan River. It's at that point he turns back and he goes by himself. And when he gets the king alone, he says, I got a message for you. It's a message from God. And Eglon leans a little closer, or I suppose it went down like that, something similar. And that's where he stabs him. And it says that the knife, it's just absorbed by his body because of how fat he was. And it's hard not to look at this and kind of laugh at it. But what's taking place here is what's referred to as a polemic. Can somebody tell me what a polemic is? Do you know what that means? What's a polemic? Anybody? It's a word that I didn't know. I had to look it up, in all fairness. But we read in the Bible, if nobody else has that, sometimes we read in the Bible, for instance, the story of Elijah. Obviously, that's something we believe happened. But remember when Elijah was facing off against all those false prophets, and he was kind of taunting them and was saying, oh, where's your God? Maybe he got up and went to relieve himself and things like that. He's mocking their false worship of this false idol. And as we read that account, that simultaneously, that would be a polemic for an Israelite reader as they're reading it. And what a polemic is, all it is it's, I guess you could say it's an attack, in this case, on this nation of Moab, but also the idolatry that, they partook in and that led Israel astray. And so this story is recorded, and when we read it, we see how silly it is to worship false gods. And that's what Israelites would have gotten out of this, is why would we turn from God and worship these false idols when we see just how futile this king is and where it ultimately leads? It's an attack on the Moabite nation and how they were viewed during that time. And so this was an interesting quote, but you read that he stabbed and it says that dung came out. And I thought this was a shocking way of putting it. This is a commentary that I own. And it just, I don't know, the words kind of popped off the page when he said it. Shocking is the word that keeps on coming to my mind. But he says, the man whom God had strengthened will eventually be reduced to a heap of fat and excrement. This is the king of Moab that's being described here. Now, how proud would you be to be a Moabite, to call yourself a Moabite after reading this story about how your king died? It would be embarrassing. And I think that's the point that the author is trying to get across to the Israelites is, look, let's remain faithful to God, because while this was embarrassing for the Moabites, wouldn't it be just as embarrassing, or perhaps more embarrassing, when you realize that that's who the Israelites were serving? They were serving this wicked king that's painted in this light. This is where their idolatry had ultimately led them, to be a slave to a nation that is clearly inferior to what God had planned for Israel. So anyways, that's a really kind of a interesting, grotesque text. Does anybody have any thoughts or comments on that? Anyone?
Well, not on that necessarily, but I didn't want to break your thought.
Yeah.
Before, at the end of the passage on Othniel, I don't think we understand how long this is, because it talks about the land had rest for 40 years.
Right. I did skip that accidentally, so I appreciate you mentioning that. Yeah.
That means they had peace and prosperity for 40 years.
Yep.
That's like, after I would be like going from the end of World War II and pretending Korea and Vietnam had not happened.
Right.
that's a long time.
Mm-hmm.
I don't. There's not too many. I don't think we can. I don't think we haven't had peace and rest for 40 years in this country. So that's a tremendous blessing, is what I'm getting at.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, they become slaves of that Mesopotamian people, and they're saved from it. And it's like they get to hit the restart button. And as you said, Brad, they were given peace and rest for 40 years, only to see them do the same things all over again. And so, again, we just think about Ehud, and an interesting judge. He's given a little bit more treatment here. But some things that I notice about Ehud that stick out to me is that he first acted alone on his faith. And when we're talking about being faithful, that sometimes is a lonely thing. I think we're blessed here to have, 150 members of South Salem Church. But even when we're part of a church, it sometimes can still be lonely to remain faithful to God, whether it's because of our day-to-day lives or because of the daily environment we're in when it comes to our job or work. But that's really the role of someone who is remaining faithful. That's the life of someone who's faithful sometimes. And more specifically, that's sometimes the life of a leader. It's sometimes a lonely position to be in. But Ehud is like Othniel in that he saw something needed to be done. They should not be enslaved to this Moabite nation. And so he first acts alone on his faith. And then let's read and pick up in verse 26. Sorry, I lost my spot in my Bible. Let's go to verse 26. It says, Ehud escaped while they delayed, and he passed beyond the idols and escaped to Seirah. When he arrived, he sounded the trumpet in the hill country of Ephraim. Then the people of Israel went down with him from the hill country, and he was their leader. And he said to them, "Follow after me, for the Lord has given your enemies, the Moabites, into your hand." So they went down after him and seized the fords of the Jordan against the Moabites and did not allow anyone to pass over. And they killed at that time about 10,000 of the Moabites, all strong, able-bodied men. Not a man escaped. And so Moab was subdued that day under the hand of Israel, and the land had rest for 80 years. So Ehud first acts alone on his faith. But then do you notice that his faith gave the people faith? At this point, I'm assuming this was a nation of Israel that had given themselves, maybe not totally, but at least somewhat had given themselves to idolatry. But this one man's act of faith ends up inspiring a whole group of people, a whole nation of people. And it's his faith that gave faith to others. And, that's what our faith can do for people sometimes, I guess, is what I want us to see, is that while sometimes our faith is it feels like a lonely thing, it feels like maybe we're in a leadership position and it's lonely, we sometimes don't realize who it is that's looking up to us. And we can get discouraged, but if we remain faithful, you have no idea sometimes the impact that can have on the people around you. I think about people in my own life, and just seeing how firm they were in my faith had an impact on me and made me more confident in my faith. And so that's, I think, something that we see with Ehud. And so naturally, it leads them to victory as they're blessed with 80 years of rest. So that's double what Brad mentioned earlier as far as their rest after the Mesopotamians. They're given 80 years of rest. That's a thorough victory. But unfortunately, it's not going to last. And so we're told about the third and final judge. We'll just mention him real quick because there's not much we can say about him. But verse 31 says, after him was Shamgar, the son of Anath, who killed 600 of the Philistines with an ox goad, and he also saved Israel. But this was Ehud, this was Shamgar and Othniel. I think we see in Ehud, some people might look at what happened and question the ethics. I'm comfortable with what he did personally, but I know some people, they read through these things and they might have questions. But I just remind you, God uses these people, and they're sometimes crude instruments, but he uses them to accomplish his will. And that's what he does with these three people. God wins every single time when we just continue to trust in him. So Anybody have any comments or questions as we wrap up? Next week, we'll talk about Deborah. That's chapters 4 and 5. So if you want to read those chapters, I encourage you to do that. But anybody have any comments or questions as we wrap up? You can go ahead and unmute your mics and all that good stuff if you'd like.
It struck me as odd that Caleb offered his daughter to somebody who would go to battle and it ended up going to his little brother. And so the guy married his niece?
Well, and that's confusing how it's worded. They're not sure if it's saying that he is Caleb's younger brother, or if it's saying that Othniel's dad is Caleb's younger brother. So, but he's either his brother or his nephew. But yeah, it is interesting. But that's kind of, we see that take place in the biblical text.
This would be after the giving of the law. That's why it struck me.
Yeah.
Once again, God using imperfect people, if that's the case.
Yep.
Well, we're all imperfect,
Mm-hmm.
and we all get used for his purposes.
Yep.
Hopefully, yeah.
And I don't know that any of us, well, I know none of us offer a perfect faith, do we?
No.
But we do offer faith, and we do the best we can, and God can use us. What was Ann Hafer going to say something? I see Jack pointing to Ann.
Perfect faith.
Oh, perfect faith. Gotcha.
That's sweet. That is sweet.
Yeah. See, Eric Shreve just joined us. He must have something good to say.
Yeah, welcome back.
Yeah.
Yes.
Jack Hafer, have you ever studied that? If that's the relationship there with Caleb, is that a nephew or?
You mean the one you were referring to earlier?
Yeah, Caleb.
Yeah, it's all interesting, all the connections. And what did you say he was?
Well, he was Caleb's nephew, but
And you were talking about Noah earlier, or Adam. Noah. Who you she was saying someone was a nephew of Noah.
no,
You were
honey,
saying-
no, it's
sorry.
Caleb.
Perfect.
And then the cousins married. If you
Yeah.
gave them to
That's what I was
marriage,
trying to get clarification on. Yeah, okay.
they were
Yeah.
cousins. the
Because
marriage.
it says in verse 13 of chapter 1, Othniel, the son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother. So
Yeah.
the question is, who is Caleb's younger brother? Is it Othniel or is it Kenaz?
Right.
Oh.
Anyways, and
Right.
from what I read, people don't really know for sure. So kind of ambiguous, but either
'Cause
way,
they-
there's a relation there.
Because didn't they use the same name over and over? It's like a lot of people are named John.
Yes. Yeah, that too.
Not
Or
many people
Jack.
named Jack.
No, everybody today is named Jack.
Only in the movies, the leading man.
Yeah.
Here we go.
And I don't think it's the case here, but I know sometimes.
No comment.
Well, I was just going to say about Kenaz, sometimes when you see son of, it doesn't always necessarily mean that it's the very next person in the lineage. It can mean that that person descended from them. Again, I'm not saying that that's the case here. I'm just saying that that does happen sometimes in the biblical text. So
What I thought was interesting is he showed that after they conquered the Moabites, they had peace for 80 years.
Yep.
And it was the faith of Ehud and what he did, and that faith, as you said, inspired other people's faith.
Mm-hmm.
When I look at the kingdom, there's 5 essential elements of the kingdom that are a must that a Christian must have. He has his faith, he has hope, he has love, he has joy, and he has peace.
Mm-hmm.
And peace is the ultimate that comes about when all those are applied. Then you have peace in your life.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what the Israelites had after that. They had peace.
Mm-hmm.
And I just thought that was interesting, those 5 elements that are essential.
Yep. It's amazing how God would just give them seemingly a fresh start after this would take place. But I see Eric and Chelsea. How's it going? Good to see you guys.
Good.
Hello.
Yeah, we just got back into town today.
Nice. Your accent got a little thicker while you were gone.
It always does, man.
Bring it home.
You go back there and it's a relapse. You just restart
Just
all
give me
over
2
again.
weeks, Sam. 2 weeks.
2 weeks.
I'm not from there, and when I came back from Florida, I had the accent for a while.
Yeah.
That's
Start saying
funny.
y'all. We
I
say
remember
you guys
hearing.
in the
I
Northwest,
remember
right?
hearing
None of the
about my
y'all.
dad traveling back to Texas where he was born and lived till he was 12. And he traveled back there as an adult, young adult, but an adult, and was preaching for the local congregation. And my mom swears that in the middle of his sermon, she heard him switch to a Southern accent because that's who his audience was.
Yeah.
That's good.
Well, Paul said to be all things to all people.
Go.
Maybe I'll start working on an accent. Now you say that.
You have one, Sam. Didn't you know it? You already have one.
Oh, what's my
You're half
accent?
Canadian.
What'd you say?
You're half Canadian.
Canadian. Yeah, I say A after every sentence.
Canadian.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, some good thoughts. And someone was saying, oh, it was Ann, I'll quote her, when the people repented and went back to God, it's always a time for fasting and prayer because they always go together. And she was talking about that last week. And so I think it seems like they're all associated together. So just always be mindful of that too. Every time you fast and you're hungry, you think, I got to pray instead of eat. And you end up praying a whole lot. Right, Ann?
Anne-Marie, right?
Anne-Marie, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
well, after a while, you just don't think about it.
Yeah.
The guys who are the experts on fasting now from a medical standpoint say like once you get past the first 24 hours, your body just starts using its own resources and it really increases your mental focus and all kinds of stuff. So there's a reason God included them to prayer and fasting together.
Yeah, we had a good conversation with my friend David Ross on the South Salem talk thing, and he talked about fasting. He had some just some interesting points, and he even just was talking about the practical side of it, like how to do it and just challenges that you encounter when you do it. So I think that one's on YouTube if you're interested in that. I think it's probably something we need to practice more. That's kind of lost in this society. When we go through hard times, we don't fast. We go to Taco Bell.
I'm buying a Ben and Jerry's. Yeah.
I would beg to differ with you, Sam. I think if the hard times are really hard times,
that's true.
Then you're not hungry. Because I know what that's like.
Yep.
I was going to say in hard times, I'm going through the fridge going, what is left in here that I can,
we go through hard times. We don't fast.
That I would eat.
Recording on.
Somebody's
got their TV on or something.
Yeah, it was Julie. I had to mute you, Julie. Sorry. It's good to have you here tonight, though.
Well, with Steve's appointment coming up, maybe we should all fast until Sunday.
Yeah.
Don't make the one that has to make you do that.
Yeah, everybody's got to keep a food log now. No, I'm just kidding.
Not a prayer log.
Yeah.
Food journal.
Anyways, well, hey, I appreciate you guys.
Good job.
Yeah, it's I don't know, that story of Ehud is always really interesting to me. It's one of those ones that's kind of hard not to laugh at, but there's a lot going on there. So
you've got to wonder how big he was, because strapped to the thigh, that was probably a 14 to 18-inch blade.
Yeah.
That gets sucked all the way in.
Yep, I know. That's one you don't even attempt to teach the kids because they just won't stop laughing the whole time. Basically. Wait till they're older. Yeah.
I think it's pretty sweet that there's a battle with Moab, and then there's 80 years where things are peaceful. And during that time, a lady named Ruth was being acquainted
Yep.
with a faithful family. I think Brad mentioned that, but that Ehud paved the way for the people who were going to be the forebears of Jesus.
Mhm. Yep.
So there was some real salvation in process.
Good.
Which goes again showing that using people who are imperfect, because that means that the physical lineage of Jesus was not pure Jewish.
Yeah. Somebody texted me, sorry, this is where it seems like I'm being rude and texting during class, but somebody texted me and said, it was always nice to have a young left-handed student. When you taught that in Bible class, it kind of gave them recognition for being left-handed. I was one of those left-handed students, by the way. So
Lefties rock.
we might be left-handed, but we're always right.
I know, right?
Is that what your wife says, Sam?
No, I'm not going to touch that one. Yeah.
Thank you, Sam. Good
Yep,
class.
thank you.
Yeah,
All right.
this was fun.
Yeah, very good class, Sam.
Thank you. Appreciate the comments. Good to see you guys.
Okay.
All right.
All right, guys.
See you later.
All right. Talk to you later.